Welcome back to the panel discussion, The Digital Agency, How CIOs Are Marrying Analytics and Applications, sponsored by New Relic on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Mark Schwartz, the CIO of the Citizenship and Immigration Service at the Homeland Security Department, and Joe Welsh, the Director of Public Sector Sales for New Relic. We talked a lot about the technology. We talked about software analytics, what it means, how it works. Let's talk about some more projects that really affect citizens and really look at improvement to the way agencies serve citizens. There's a couple out there that I know you mentioned. The I-90, for instance, is one of those. Looking forward, I mean, what is your roadmap, if you will, for modernization? I mean, that's what we're kind of talking about when we talk about specific applications. Mark, let me start with you.
The roadmap includes adding e-filing and status information for pretty much every way that the public interacts with us. What we really want to do is tie it all together by building a brand. In a way, we are the brand of the United States to new immigrants. We want to be able to tie the pieces together to convey a certain impression about the United States government, and what it's like to interact with us to the benefit seekers. So what we really have in mind is sort of a integrated rethinking of how we manage the relationship with customers or with applicants for our benefits. And that includes not just the electronic touch points, but also the pieces of paper that we still have to send, our offices and what the experience is like when people come into our offices and so on.
When you talk about these new projects, the roadmap, if you will, the touch points, where does the software analytics play into that as you're making decisions, as you're saying, here's what's maybe prioritization?
I think it's for us. It's become something that's just a normal part of how we do everything. Software analytics is part of how we deliver software. So anything that has an online component for me from now on is going to involve software analytics.
And let me turn to Joe. One thing that you're seeing from your customers in the federal market is around that very modernization roadmap as well. Right. We hear about it all the time from the Office of Management and Budget and GAO. Congress talks about modernizing. What are you seeing? What kinds of applications do you see happening? Where does software analytics fit into those decisions that are made of what gets done maybe first? Very similar to what I asked Mark.
Sure. So, the world we live in today, right? People are using, less of desktop, so to speak, and more of, mobile. Everybody has, a smartphone or a tablet or those things. The thing that goes hand in hand with that, right, is applications, right? There's an app for everything. And we're actually seeing, government agencies have apps. They have, their websites too, where you can hopefully point and click 3 times, the 3-click method. And with all those things, what they're doing is basically they're making, they're making that agency more efficient, right? More user-friendly. Now, behind the scenes, companies like New Relic, those systems have to be monitored, right? You need to know if your application or your app is running and performing properly, because if you don't, as Mark's alluded to, it's a bad experience for our constituents. In this case, in many cases, the customer of most government agencies is Joe Public, right? And it's no different than going to a store or a restaurant and having a good experience. When you go to, a certain agency to get a task done, whether it's taxes or anything else, you want to have a good experience, and you want it to be efficient, and you want it to be easy.
And I think that leads us down the path of metrics a little bit. At the end of the section 2, metrics was something that kind of came to my mind as we were talking about it. What are good metrics? How do you measure if it's a good experience? I mean, there's all these customer satisfaction metrics, but at the same time, the software and the technology can provide you with a different set of metrics. Let me start with Joe, and then maybe Mark will turn to you to see what you guys are doing.
Right. I think that the key metric is ease of use, right? It's so funny when you talk to customers and agencies, they're always so worried, like, is this going to be hard to use, or the technology is not user friendly. And I always use the example of Amazon. If you go to the Amazon site, does anybody train you how to use the site? No, it's intuitive, right? And, more and more, we need to get to that point, within agencies, within, the applications that they're using. It needs to be more intuitive, because that becomes significantly easier for citizens. And, we're not going to go backward in time. There's only going to be more.
We're not going back to paper?
We're not.
PDFs?
Well, yeah, right.
Why?
Right. So, there's only going to be more applications, more apps. And within that, I think we become more efficient. But you also, as Mark alluded to, any software moving forward, I think you said, I want to understand and have analytics behind that. It's just, that's the nature of where we're going. It's like, you have an Oreo, you want to have milk with it. It's one goes with the other.
One of the things I think Joe brought up, besides Oreos, which now I'm a little hungry, but that's a whole different story, is this idea of making sure people, it's easy to use, make sure they have a good experience with it. How are you guys using, maybe what metrics you're using to ensure that user experience?
It's again a little hard for me to say. I'm a little distant from the action in some ways.
But when you're developing, let me just take us to the DevOps piece for a second, because I think this is part of the discussion. When you're doing an iteration, right, developing the next piece of software, you have to you have a user experience team, or your team goes to the users to say, is that where that data comes from? And then you can bring them the software data to say, hey, here's other data to keep in mind as we're making plans.
Right. We want the applicant to be successful at what they're trying to do. Right. Ultimately, we want them to be successful at submitting their application and getting the information that they want to get. So, in many ways, we're looking at it like you could imagine maybe Amazon does, or some other online vendor. They're looking at how many people are able to complete their transactions, things like shopping cart abandonment rate and that sort of metric. For us, it's a little hard to see where the equivalent is, right? But that essentially is what we care about. Who starts the process? How long does it take them to complete it? How many of them complete it? What frustrations do they have on the way? How many customer service phone calls do we have to get to answer questions? It's all of those things that tell us whether they're able to use the system effectively and efficiently.
And knowledge really is power, right? So, if you have a process as an example where, everybody seems to be dropping off, you use the shopping cart, but everybody seems to be dropping off in step 3, well, clearly there's probably something wrong with step 3. And without, software analytics looking into, okay, well, there's a glitch on step 3, they're never going to get to step 5 and be able to finish what, they came online to do. And as a citizen, that's very frustrating, right? You don't want to physically maybe have to go into an office and wait in line. You want to be able to do it. You want to be able to do it quickly and easily. So that's why, the analytics in the background is so important.
And I think one of the best examples that's going on is the Social Security Administration, in terms of just something simple as getting your Social Security card, a new one, if you lost it, if it was stolen, if it got washed too many times. And they're saying, how can we do this online? I had a great conversation.
Taxes, think about that.
Taxes.
I mean, we're at the point now where, it seems like everybody does their taxes online. They're not doing that anymore. Well, if the IRS didn't have information analytics on those systems, coming up in a couple of weeks, where I'm sure it's a huge surge, that's dangerous. Right. And I think that probably keeps the C-level folks over there up at night. But that's just one example of, that's a big example that most citizens deal with, right?
Exactly. And actually, you bring up a good point, the C-level. I mean, because this data analytics, this idea of this knowledge is power, really changes the conversation for CXOs, whether it's deputy secretaries, or CIOs like yourself, Mark. So talk a little bit about what's the changing role that you're seeing, maybe, Joe, with your clients. How are the C-level folks using data differently to make decisions, to understand what's going on in their agency?
The interesting thing is that I've found, as I go and I talk to customers, the data, knowledge is power, like we said, but it's almost addictive, right? It's addictive. You literally, we have the ability with technology like New Relic to give you so much information that it becomes addictive. And it especially when you can see that information from your smartphone or your tablet and you're at home and, you're looking at your systems and how efficient are they remotely, it becomes addictive, right? As I had mentioned, I think I mentioned at some point, that's why I really encourage, my customers here, use our technology. You can get it up and running very quickly and you get information immediately. The satisfaction is immediate, which is
or
really
frustration of so
or
much
frustration.
data.
Sure, exactly.
I mean, that is the data overload is a big issue. I mean, Mark, from a CIO's perspective, do you face that issue as well, the data overload? And how do you deal with your CFO, your CIO, your other C-level folks?
I think we share a common interest. What we're really focused on is outcomes rather than the data and the mechanics of getting to those outcomes. I think the data is a very important part for my employees, for the other people involved in projects, in helping us get to those outcomes. But from my point of view, what I'm looking at is that impact on our applications filled out. Are they filled out comprehensively, thoroughly, with the information we need? Are we able to process them quickly and efficiently? So it's really more about outcomes to me. But I think there's something else below the surface. There's the change management aspect of what I'm doing. I really want to encourage the people who are working on my projects to think in terms of data and think in terms of seeing initiatives all the way through to the harvesting of business value. I want them to be thinking about how systems are performing in production, how we can continuously improve them to get the outcomes that we want. And data and analytics play a very important part in that change management. I want people focused on those things and thinking about how they can impact the outcomes.
When you go to meetings with your other C-suite folks, again, CFO, Chief Acquisition Officer, Chief Human Capital Officer, how much does data play into the outcome discussion? I mean, you're not just talking about the data, like, oh, that's red or that's green, but okay, what does that mean if something is red or green for the mission? Does that come up often?
Oh, it does. That's the basis of our conversation typically. We also have an Office of Performance and Quality, which is maybe the office most responsible for analyzing the outcomes that we're achieving. Especially when it comes to questions of efficiency and effectiveness of our adjudication process, that's really their concern. And they feed a lot of information to the rest of us to understand what's going on across the agency.
And I think that's so important to understand what's going on across the rest of the agency. Joe, do you find that you may have the conversation with a CIO like Mark, but then all of a sudden the next time you go visit a customer, it's the CAO or the CFO's in there now too asking, hey, what about this data? Or can you do this? Does this conversation changing for you?
Absolutely. And the CTO, obviously.
CTO, right.
Yeah,
Well,
the Chief Technology Officer.
I lump them with the CIO.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes down to, as Mark mentioned, his job, he wears many different hats, right? And he leaves, as you mentioned, the software piece and the technology piece to his experts, right? But the key is he's arming his experts with great tools, and a big part of the tools that they need is the software analytics behind the scenes, so they can do their job better and make great decisions when Mark gets them together and say, okay, we have this 50-year-old system. Is it time? I'm not saying that you do, Mark, but is it time to let go of, this piece or that piece and bring in potentially new technology? You're not going to do that willy-nilly, right? You're going to want to have real data to make those decisions in the best interest of not only, CIS, but for the citizen.
We've had a broad-ranging conversation. We talked about software analytics. We've talked about the need to serve citizens better, using the data to do that. We've talked a little bit about cloud and the technology behind it, and knowledge is power. Where do you see the market going? Where do you see this idea of software analytics and serving citizens better? Where do you see it going, Mark, over the next, if you looked in your crystal ball for a year from now, where would CIS be?
So it's all about continuous improvement. I think that's really what we're talking about in a way is we're going to make improvements to how the public experience, and by the way, I'm not using the word citizen because, of course, in our business, it's mostly non-citizens that we're dealing with.
But you have customers, right?
Our customers, yeah. We're I hope going to be monitoring how well they're interacting with our systems and making constant improvements to those things and making it a better and better experience and a more and more seamless experience and making it a natural part of their lives just like they do all the other things that they do online.
Right.
That's the direction for us.
Right. And I hope to Jason's point there that you're never using a crystal ball. I hope you're using technology like New Relic so you don't have to, look in and make a guess into the future.
I think the word there I'm looking for is touche.
Oh.
Well done, Joe.
Thank you.
Well, we're almost out of time. Real quick, Joe, you get the last word of the day. What's the biggest obstacle, hurdle? What advice do you have for federal agencies, others who are going down this path?
Well, I'd really like to thank Mark first off because, joining us here today, but I really wish more CIOs were as forward-thinking as Mark and CIS is in the broad scheme of things. So, using technology to their benefit to not only help them perform their mission, but quite honestly, helping the citizens make their life a lot easier too. So. Thank you, Mark, and hopefully other CIOs are out there and they know that it's not something to be scared of.
All right, don't be scared. Good advice. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. You've been listening to the panel discussion, The Digital Agency, How CIOs Are Marrying Analytics and Applications, sponsored by New Relic on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. I'd like to thank our guests today, Mark Schwartz, the CIO of the Citizenship and Immigration Services at the Department of Homeland Security, and Joe Welsh, the Director of Public Sector Sales for New Relic. Thank you again for the great conversation. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsradio.com/New Relic.
On behalf of New Relic, thank you for joining our discussion. We'll have the archive from this session available shortly, and a link will be sent to you to share with your colleagues. Those of you who requested training certificates will receive an email with download instructions immediately following the webinar. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you.